On behalf of the Centerville City Beautiful Commission, I welcome all of you and thank you so much for coming out in this cold weather. Our goal today is to give you all a little bit of spring, despite what's laying on the ground outside and what's still to come. Appreciate you coming and thank you so much. I'd like to give you just a very brief overview of the City Beautiful Commission. This is a commission of volunteers that are selected by the City Council. We meet monthly on the first Tuesday of every month, and we are involved in a number of activities in the city. Basically, our mission is to keep Centerville the beautiful city that it is. The requirements to be on the City Beautiful Commission are none except the desire to help keep the city a great looking place to be, to live, to work, to play, and to shop. We have a number of activities. Basically, a lot of things occur in the summertime. We look all over the city at landscaping, at homes and at businesses, churches, condo and apartment complexes, things of that nature, to see the most outstanding landscape in the areas. And those who are awarded these outstanding awards are given a beautiful stone with the year engraved on it and the City Beautification Award. We also do this with the businesses, and the businesses receive a plaque that says Business Pride on it. We also help the Centerville Public Works. They are pretty much our parent company, so to speak. We help them select the plants for the city. We keep the help with tree selection for Arbor Day. We also select all the flowers, plant and maintain the gardens in front of City Barbecue and Graders, and the little cottage next to that parking lot, the Oshel Wright House. We also sponsor Arbor Day, which this year is April 16th, and that will be held down at Stubbs Park. This year, we are privileged to plant 9 cherry trees around the Veterans Memorial. And this is going to be a really beautiful ceremony, and when these trees mature, it's going to be breathtaking. So that's going to be at 10 o'clock on the 16th, and it is open to the public, anybody who would like to come and see this. The composition of the commission consists of 3 staff persons, one of whom is our newly sworn in and newly elected council person, Joanne Rao. Joanne, would you stand and let everybody see you? Thank you. Our Director of Public Works, Mr. Rob James. Rob, where are you? Up there, thanks. And our Operations Manager for Public Works, Mary Lou Pence. Mary Lou's over here in the corner. The rest of our commission is composed of 12 members at this time. We have space for 2 more. If you're interested and you live in the city of Centerville, we welcome you to apply to us for the possibility of becoming a commissioner. Would anybody that's in the room that is a commissioner please raise your hand? Sherry, do we have nobody in here? Okay, you've met most of our folks out front and out on the side here coming on in, and we appreciate that. It is definitely my pleasure and my honor to present to everyone the mayor of our city, who will introduce our speaker, Mayor Mark Kingsey. Please welcome him.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is a great crowd. Welcome to warm and cheerful Centerville. That logo has been in place for a long time. It's hard to imagine it on a day like today, but our main speaker assures me that spring, in fact, is coming, and in fact, she guaranteed that it'll arrive, I think, with warm temperatures on Monday. So you make sure you get her number and her email to follow up on that. I do want to thank all the members of the City Beautiful Commission for all the work they do. They really are a very active group in the city, and they do a tremendous job helping to beautify this city and to recognize the families that go the extra mile to make their homes beautiful with gardening and all of the aesthetic things that make things so beautiful. So we're very appreciative of that, very appreciative of them organizing this great event this morning, and I'm so happy we have such a large crowd. We do really have a special guest, someone who is going to be entertaining us for a while and talking about things that we're all very interested in. And I'm very happy to be able to introduce Pam Bennett, our main speaker. Pam is very distinguished in this field. She has a master's from agricultural education, and I was told to make sure I said this right, from The Ohio State University. She also has a BS in landscape horticulture. She is an extension agent at horticulture from Ohio State University and the horticultural educator and director of the Ohio State University Extension Branch. She also is a member of a number of boards and affiliations, an extension horticulture educator, and a state master gardener volunteer coordinator. I think many of us probably remember seeing some of Pam's articles as a contributor in the Dayton Daily News and the Springfield News. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring up our main speaker, Pam Bennett.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I was really excited about being introduced by a mayor. I've never been introduced by a mayor before, and I liked you at first, Mr. Mayor, but now you put the pressure on me. I don't know that spring is coming next Monday, but it's coming soon. I guarantee it. It's on the calendar. It will be here. And wow, how many people are here today? It's really overwhelming. And somebody said that I was the draw, and I said, no. You guys just want to come and see pretty pictures because you are sick and tired of seeing snow, right? Well, I'm the same way, and I noticed in the last couple weeks, or couple days rather, many of my friends on Facebook are posting pictures of summer flowers. So if you're on Facebook, join the crowd because it is so nice to see tulips and daffodils and annuals in bloom. So I know we've all had a long, hard winter, and a lot of questions right now are coming in about what's this weather going to do? Is it going to kill all the mosquitoes, kill all the bugs? Well, the answer is no. They have an amazing antifreeze, and they can tolerate just about anything. And we've got a good snow cover, so they're hiding under there. You can go out and find them right now probably. But it may do some damage to some of the plants. We've had some interesting temperatures, interesting drops. So it's going to be kind of interesting to me to see what happens to some of our plants. But with annuals, we can still go ahead and start planting. So what we're going to do today, and everybody should have a handout, we are going to do a really fast trip through about 300 slides of great color pictures. And I'm going to talk really fast, and we will get finished. But we are going to talk at first about our trials and how we came about determining that these are the best plants to use. And I'm going to share with you some information on the plants today are extremely easy to grow. And many people, how many of you grow annuals? Raise your hand. How many of you don't grow annuals because you think they're more of a challenge or too much maintenance and so forth? Some people have this thought that they are, but I'll tell you what, today's annuals are extremely different. In our field trials, we evaluate over 200 different varieties, and our purpose is to find that variety that is the easiest to grow, easiest to maintain. This is an example of our field trial plots. Our offices are in Springfield, Ohio. We are across from the fairgrounds in a corporate park, and we have over 5 acres of demonstration gardens. So you are welcome to come anytime during the summer months, daylight hours, and look at our trials, look at our gardens, get some ideas for your landscape, for your community. The best thing about it is, if you look right down here at the bottom, all these plants are labeled. So bring your paper, bring your pencils. You can get lots of great ideas and write down the names and varieties of the plants. The best thing about our trials is we don't do anything to make the soil any better than what you guys probably have in your own backyard. In fact, our soil is probably worse than what you're growing in your backyard. We have clay soil, pH 7 to 7.3. We do add compost, which is recommended to improve heavy clay soils. If you add compost every year, every 2 or 3 years, you're going to improve your soil. And everything we plant is in full sun. So today, that list that I go over, if I don't say this is in shade, make the assumption that it's in full sun. This is our shade structure, so when I say it's in shade, it's in 70% shade. So it's a pretty heavy, pretty standard shade. These are our volunteers. They do all the work in getting everything started at the greenhouses, getting everything planted. And years ago, 10 years ago, if I'd have stood here and told you about annuals, did a program on annuals, I would have said, when you buy that flat, you got to cut those back in order to get them to really reestablish in your garden. And people would just have absolute fits because I just paid $18 for this flat of flowers. I don't want to cut all the flowers off. Nobody would do it. But it was good for the plants because it would cause them to branch out. Today's annuals are extremely different than what we had 10 years ago. The genetics, the breeding that's happening right now, these plants don't need cut back. So we don't do this anymore. I want to show you this group right here in the front and this group right here in the back. These were cut back, these weren't. They are vigorous plants. They don't need to be cut back anymore. And now this is with most of the new vegetative cuttings. Cut back, not cut back. Cut back, not cut back. So that's one maintenance thing that we don't have to do anymore because of today's new annuals. Now, I share with you the method. There are lots of trial sites across the country. We're just one of them here at Ohio State University. We do ours a certain way. Other trial sites do different treatments. A lot of trial sites will mulch their beds. We don't mulch the beds. We add the compost, and that's about it. We plant on May 25th. We have 6 plants in a row. They're 1.5 feet apart, and they are 2 feet apart from each other. If they're smaller plants, if they're vining or trailing plants, we plant them 4 foot apart. This is really important. We fertilize 1 time in the summer. 1 time. Now, that's a heck of a lot easier than going back and fertilizing every 2 weeks or every week and so forth. Keep in mind these are in the ground, so the soil's different than if you have a container. Containers have to be fertilized regularly. And we fertilize based on a soil test. How many of you have done a soil test? Good, good. You must be master gardeners because we push that really hard for soil testing. Soil test gives you a baseline on what your nutrients are. And you know, I'm not going to get into the phosphorus issue right now very deep, but a lot of times we have high phosphorus in our soils and we don't need to add phosphorus fertilizers. You only know that from a soil test. So I would encourage you to do at least 1 standard basic soil test so that you know, do I really need to fertilize these plants? We do the 14, 14, 14 because they do need that first number, nitrogen. They all have to have that. We fertilize each plant as we plant them. Now I want to show you, fertilized, not fertilized. If we have those nutrients in our soils, why do we need to add extra? I truly think that sometimes we over-fertilize our annuals that are in flower beds in the ground, and they don't need it, and they get tall and leggy and lanky, and then by the end of August, we're like tired of them. We don't do that except for 1 time with a slow release. We irrigate as needed, and this is the most important thing, no deadheading. All of these plants that you're going to see today that are top performers, and all of those on your list, unless I say so otherwise, like the geraniums, we don't deadhead. You're going to see pictures from August and September of plants that look just like this without any extra maintenance other than possibly irrigation. These are our trials in the early part of the season. We don't use insecticides, fungicides, mulch. In other words, we do very little. So if we do very little, imagine if you take care of your plants and you irrigate a little more and you fertilize, or rather you mulch, your beds are going to be spectacular. We have an evaluation, and you can go to this website to see what our evaluations are for the season. I'm going to share with you today those top performing varieties that are extremely easy to maintain. So let's get started. We're going to speed through this. We're going to get through in about an hour, and hopefully I'm going to inspire you to want to go home and, well, you're not going to start right now, but in a couple months we're going to get started, right? Angelonia. How many of you are growing Angelonia? Outstanding plant. Sun, it's fantastic. A little bit of shade, not so much. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some shade alternatives because of an impatient issue that we have right now. This is Angelonia. There are all different varieties of Angelonia. It is a sunny plant for dry or wet. It's a Mediterranean plant, so it does well in dry or wet. It can be put in a container or it can be put in a bedding plant situation. Angelonias, now I'm going to use the term series. Series. What that means is, you see this is angel face. There's angel face, angel mist, serena, carita. Those are all series. That means they have the same characteristics as far as height and width and habit, but different colors. So angel face is taller. Most of the angelonias are upright, kind of a vase-shaped plant, and get around 2 feet tall. Serena is a short, compact variety. These plants, this is angel mist spreading. Again, this was taken in late August. No deadheading. I mean, to me, that's a very easy plant to grow. Different colors, but they primarily are in the pastel colors. So here you have a cool color, blues, purples, pinks, that you can put in the hot sun and give the impression of cooling that area down. Angel mist spreading, dark purple, and Serena white. Serena white's more compact. Make good cut flowers. Angel face, angel mist, grows upright, long stems, make very good cut flowers for the containers. Now on your list, I'm going to skip over some plants. I can't talk about every single one of those, but if it's on that list, it is a good plant to use in the garden, and it is low maintenance. Carita and Alonia, like I said, all different kinds of series. Dragon wings, begonias. Now, again, I'm going to talk about impatiens and alternatives for using impatiens in the garden. Dragon wings is excellent for sun or shade. The downside with dragon wings, it's a very, very brittle plant. So if you have it in an area where there's high traffic, children, basketballs, or peacocks like they have at the Cincinnati Zoo, it won't do well. If you have it in an area where it's protected, it'll do spectacular. Put this plant in the sun and it's shorter, more compact, a little more faded. Foliage in the sun is going to fade when it comes to begonias. Not quite as dark, deep green, not quite as large. Baby wings is a great one to use for a container. Dragon wings sometimes gets very large, 3 feet, and can really take over a container. A hanging basket, baby wings is spectacular for sun or shade. This is another one that came out a couple years ago. This is a hybrid called Gryphon. Now this plant is really cool, and it's good for a big, bold impression. I had one of these in a container on both sides of my door, two containers with one each. And my husband swore he had to go get the machete just to get in because they grew unbelievable. 3 foot across, almost covered the entire front door. The neat thing about them is they have the dark burgundy veination, and the stems are also dark burgundy. But you can see how large. These are 36-inch containers. Great with other plants. So it's a big, bold plant. You only need one of them. You're going to pay a little bit more, but you only need one of them. Begonia, surefire red and pink. So there's a lot of series of begonias. You have several different ones on there, bonfires on there, several different varieties. This is in the shade, and again, in the sun. You can see it's a little more compact, a little smaller, a little less colorful as far as the quality of the foliage. But this was outstanding in sun or shade. And there are a lot of different begonia varieties to use. Calibrachoa. Now, Calibrachoa are not bedding plants. They look like a petunia. They're actually not a petunia. They are in that family, but they're not a petunia. This is what they look like if they're put in the ground. They do not like clay soil and high pH, and our pH of 7.3 is considered too high for them. So if you put them in the ground, this is what you'll get by about mid-July. They are a great container plant. If you put these in a container, they're spectacular because the soil is different. You're using a soilless mix. Don't use regular topsoil from the ground because that's high pH. A soilless mix in a container, and they're going to look like this. And I'll tell you, they're beautiful. The colors, and I just love plant names. Lemon Bells, Grape Punch. They're coming out with some great colors. And again, they all get about 3 feet wide, and they'll hang down over a container very nicely. Super Bell's Dreamsicle, Coralberry Punch, all great colors and beautiful for the garden. We are making some really good strides in breeding when it comes to celosia. Several years ago, we trialed some, and if they weren't deadheaded, they didn't look very good at all by the end of the season. This is a new one that came out last couple years called First Flame. This is taken in late August, and you can see it was last year when you remember we got that dry spell in late August. Look at that as far as flowers without deadheading. So I'm really, really impressed with this particular coleus. And First Flame Yellow, nice color. And what we're looking for is massive coloration in these plants. Cleome, Senorita Rosalita. How many are using Senorita Rosalita? Why aren't you using it? Full sun, you don't have sun, huh? Does anybody not use it because of cost? $4.99. Be proud to say that. I agree. They're expensive. $4.99 for a 4-inch plant. But here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. These plants are propagated through vegetative cuttings, which means they take a cutting, they root it, and they start it that way, as opposed to seeds. The newer methods, the vegetative cuttings, are much, much superior than to some of our seed varieties. Senorita Rosalita gets about 3 feet tall by about 3 feet wide, which means you only need a few of them in a large area. I put 4 in. I bit the bullet a couple years ago and said, okay, I'm going to spend $5, even though it was killing me to spend $5 for a 4-inch pot. But those things were spectacular, and they filled in, and you could see them 250 feet away from the road because our house sits way back. So you're going to pay a little bit more, but I urge you to bite the bullet, pay a little bit more, and see the value of what you get out of these plants. And the other thing about Senorita Rosalita, she keeps her foliage all summer long as opposed to some of the older varieties. And you know, nobody likes that real spindly look, but if you look, and Apple Blossom is another one that does that, look at the foliage and look at the size of that plant. Now this is a sterile plant, so it is not going to attract butterflies, hummingbirds, but it will not reseed like some of the other species, Cleome. So if you're looking for a cottage garden type where it just reseeds and it's okay, this isn't the plant. But if you want a big, bold, beautiful purple flower all summer long, no deadheading, this is a great plant. A couple years ago, they came out with Senorita Blanca. I was okay with it the first year until the second year I saw it mixed in a container as the centerpiece of a container with some other plants around it, and it really looked very, very nice. And it gets about, again, 3 feet tall. Now, here's the deal with impatiens. How many of you have heard of impatiens downy mildew? How many of you are scared to death to plant impatiens? Well, don't be, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when I get to impatiens. But what we are what we're doing in our trials, we're taking some of these full sun plants and putting them in our shade cloth. And look at that, folks. Who'd have thunk Cleome would have looked like that in the shade? So I'm really excited. I sent back to our ball and proven winners and the people we're working with, our breeders and our growers, and I'm saying, look, these plants have some potential to be advertised and marketed for a shade substitute. And that's a big deal in our industry right now. So these are both full shade, heavy shade all summer long, and still giving you that massive color. We're going to try it again this year to see, you know, maybe it was an anomaly. I don't think so. But I would encourage people to start experimenting in some of their shady areas. Coleus. I'm only going to say a couple words about coleus. There's a lot of them out there. It makes it really hard to choose from. My go-to reason for choosing coleus would be looking at my go-to factor would be looking at the height. These plants can get really big or they can be small. Most of our coleus varieties are about 2 foot tall by about a foot, foot and a half wide. But you can also get chocolate drop and strawberry drop, which are spreaders, big 3 and 4 feet spreaders hanging over baskets, or you can get Sedona and some of the other ones that are 3 to 4 feet tall and gigantic. So make sure if you're buying a coleus, look at how big it gets and its growth habit. The other thing about coleus is they need something else to go with them. They just don't stand alone, especially if they're against a green background or they just kind of fade. They need other colors that make them pop. Pink petunias, white petunias, something that will draw out the colors in the coleus that'll make them stand out. And this is a great example. A nice foliage plant with a light green, an ornamental grass with the white color makes that redhead really stand out. So keep that in mind when you're designing with coleus. Anybody using cypress? King Tut, Baby Tut, these are great, but they are expensive again. I've seen them anywhere from $7.99 for a quart up to $14.99. And even at $14.99, I have to think, ooh, that's a little expensive, but I will tell you, they are phenomenal plants. So here's the deal. Remember I said we don't water too much. Campus does the same kind of trials, similar plants to what we're doing. They irrigate on a regular basis, they fertilize on a regular basis, and they mulch every year so that mulch goes back into the soil and really improves the quality of the soil. They get different results from the same plants. So Baby Tut, these plants like water, cypress like water. Baby Tut in the ground under our conditions, minimal, are about 1 foot to 2 foot tall. Lots of water, they can get 3 foot tall. King Tut in the ground, our conditions, 3 foot, wet conditions, lots of water, 6 foot. So they can be really bold plants. Now the great thing about King Tut, it makes a phenomenal centerpiece. It is a great plant, especially in a downtown area, a big container. You want to talk people stopping? People stop and say, what is that plant? This is an early stage of King Tut, but again, 6 feet tall because it's in a container, getting regular water and fertilization. This is at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. This wall is about 12 feet tall. So you can see that just stands out, and it's very architectural. Lots of structure to it, so it's a good plant to use. Again, a little more money. And this is baby tut in a container with those calibrachoa. Euphorbias, been around a while. They're great plants to use. In the ground, they can take dry, wet, they can take just about any kind of season and look the same. In the ground, they're about a foot, foot and a half wide by about a foot tall, just a nice rounded mound. Now, the other challenge you'll find in the industry right now is when one company discovers a great plant, everybody else is working on it too. And then they come out with these plants that all look the same. I dare you to tell me what's the difference with some of those. You really can't see it, right? They have to be different in order for a company to give it a different name. Genetically, there has to be something different or it would be illegal to propagate it. So they are a little bit different. White Maneus is a little taller, Breathless Bush is a little darker. But nonetheless, they're all excellent plants to use, depending, never mind the variety, I guess. In a container, they're different. They're not as competitive. You saw what they look like in the ground, full, nice cover, looks like a bundle of baby's breath. This is what they look like in a container. They do not fill in, they do not compete well. So what you'll see is just kind of a nice, frilly, lacy fill in, just kind of meander through a container, and that's great. That's what we like in containers, that filler plant. But just keep in mind, you're not going to get that bold, solid white color. Come on, I didn't hear any. Oh, look at this plant, guys. Look at this blue. Yeah, isn't this spectacular? Blew my mind, Evolvulus. This is a newer one that's come out recently. And I'll tell you, it's probably one of the truest blue colors in flowers that you're going to find. Blew my mind. It's a ground cover type plant, spreading about 2 feet wide, only about 6-8 inches in height. But look at that flower. And the stem, it just keeps blooming right on up the stem. So again, did I tell you we don't deadhead? No deadheading on this plant. It's a great plant for containers. More for sun, but in the shade, you're still going to get some color. This is in the shade. Not as many flowers in the shade, but you'll still get some. But look at this. Put this with orange, a one color, a monocolor scheme with Juncus Blue Dart in a blue container was really, really spectacular. Gomphrena. Now this is the old, many of you have been gardening for a while, strawberry fields and purple globe, the old Gomphrenias, globe plant. A great dried flower, a great cut flower, a great, put in a container and so forth in the house. Excellent for attracting butterflies and hummingbirds. This thing was just loaded with them during the summer. This is a newer one called Fireworks, about 3 feet tall. And the nice thing about these is they just kind of blow in the wind. They just kind of give movement to the garden. And another one this last year, a little shorter rather, compact, called Forest Carmen. So Gomphrenias have come a long way from the two that I mentioned earlier, and they are spectacular to use in the garden. Excellent for a cottage garden, or again, like I said, if you want to attract butterflies and moths. And there's a close-up shot. Okay, hibiscus, mahogany splendor. Did anybody grow this? This came out a couple years ago. It hasn't really made a big hit, but I got to tell you, it is a super plant to fill in large areas. This is a sterile hibiscus. It's never bloomed in our area. It does bloom down south in Florida, but it's never bloomed in our area. It is more of a foliage plant. One plant gets around 5 feet tall by about 5 feet wide. Now, it is an annual hibiscus. It's not hardy, and I did everything I could, believe me, to try to get it to overwinter. I mulched it, I babied it, I protected it, but it is not hardy. It's about a zone 8 plant. But look at that with some pink petunias. The dark bold colored has a maple-like leaf. 1-2 plants would be all you need for a very large location. All right, here we are on impatiens. So what's the big deal? Well, in the last several years, 4 or 5 years, we have discovered downy mildew on impatiens in our country. Came in from Europe in about, I think it was 2006. And it is a very devastating disease of impatiens. Now, impatiens are the #1 bedding plant. How many of you have planted impatiens in the same spot every year for many years? Raise your hand. Bad thing to do, folks. Bad thing to do. when you keep putting the same plant in the same spot over and over and over, if a disease starts to build up or an insect population builds up, you're feeding that problem. So by planting impatiens every year in that same spot, if the disease is there or present, you're just going to keep feeding that disease. So we try to practice rotation. You've heard farmers do crop rotation. That's for pest management and for fertilization. We need to do a better job of practicing crop rotation with our annual flowers as well. So with impatiens downy mildew, it will kill a plant. We are seeing it over winter in our landscape. So if you had it this year and it's overwintered in your landscape, don't put impatiens back in that spot next year. You could put impatiens in your landscape, but maybe somewhere else way far away. You may get it, you may not, but don't put impatiens back in there. But my take home is, don't completely throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't stop planting impatiens because you've heard this. Our greenhouses are kind of cutting back on the number they're growing, but they still have value in the landscape. But what I'm telling you is don't plant them in the same spot every year, and be aware and on the lookout. If you have downy mildew in the landscape, get rid of them immediately, clean up that flower bed, put them in the trash, don't compost them, and prevent it from spreading in your landscape or in your area. Growers have products that they can use to spray and prevent it. Homeowners don't. So they are doing a really good job of preventing it at the greenhouse level. For homeowners, if you get it in the landscape, the best thing to do is rogue those plants out and get rid of them. So I'm just saying, kind of keep that in mind and be aware about our impatiens issue. So the problem is, what else do we put in the shade? Because who doesn't plant it in the shade every year? It's great. Size-wise, color-wise, easy to maintain, you don't have to deadhead. They're the perfect plant for shade. Now we've got a little bit of a challenge. So I'm going to show you several plants, and like I said, the cleome was one that could be a substitute. Sun patiens are a hybrid. They are not susceptible to downy mildew. So only the impatiens walleriana, that species, some of our impatiens that are in our native areas are susceptible, but impatiens hybrids, this sun patiens, is not susceptible. It will grow in the shade and it will take full sun, so it can go either way. New Guinea impatiens are impatiens hockeri. They are absolutely not susceptible to downy mildew. Now, impatiens hockeri came out several years ago, and they, well, gosh, back in the early 80s when I was first starting my career, we got these impatiens. They said, hey, you can put these impatiens in the sun, and they're going to do great. And we did, and they didn't. They looked terrible in the full sun. They need morning sun, if that, and afternoon shade. They cannot take that hot afternoon direct full heat and sun. So if you're going to put them in sun, put them in a morning sun where it's kind of a lighter, easier sun, and then in the afternoon, have them in the shade. Or put them in full shade, and we grow them in full shade. So New Guinea impatiens are resistant. They will not get downy mildew, so you could put these as a substitute. All right, sweet potatoes. Sweet potato vines, they're just too many of them to even talk about. There's lots of varieties, and we haven't had any new varieties in the last few years, and that's been kind of nice. This was 4 years ago, then they came up with more. They all have the same growth habit. They're big bullies. They spread 6, 8, 12 feet, which is fine for a commercial planting or a city flower bed that has lots of space that you want to fill in and attract color. It's good for that. But for a small container for a homeowner, this is what you get. And I don't know, for some reason, we just can't get the message at our gardens. We just keep putting them in here and they just keep taking over. You have to cut them back on a regular basis. Now, I am hearing good things out of Florida. They are doing quite a bit of breeding with sweet potatoes, and they're telling me there may be a dwarf variety coming out soon. If that happens, that's exciting, because that means homeowners then that have these smaller containers will be able to plant them and not have to cut them back all the time. This particular plant, this is an extremely large container in a downtown planting. That's perfect. That's where you want to put something like that. Same thing with this one. This pot is about 4 foot tall, king tut on the top and 2 sweet potato vines hanging down. That's a perfect arrangement. Lantana, similar to the coleus message. Make sure you know what size they get. The Patriot series that came out years ago were 3 feet, 4 feet. Even some of the ones I had a couple years ago, they were like pulling shrubs out when I took them out in the fall. They're very vigorous plants. There are newer cultivars on your list or varieties called Luscious Grape, Citrus Blend, smaller, more compact. So if you purchase a Lantana, know how big it gets. Lantana are spectacular for butterflies and hummingbirds. These things, in the last 2 years we've had them in the gardens, they're just afloat with skippers, admirals, all kinds of different butterflies in the summer months. So they're great to attract butterflies. Close-up shot, beautiful flowers too, really pretty flowers. Okay, Lobularia. This is an alyssum. We've now gone to switch it to the genus name, which is Lobularia, so it kind of makes you think it's a different plant, but it's not. This is Snow Princess, the first one that came out that was touted as being heat tolerant, and I will tell you, it is heat tolerant. Is anybody growing this? All summer long. This is late August, and you can see some of our plants are already starting to die and the ground is still dry. This is late summer. Even in Dallas, Texas, in their trials at the Dallas Arboretum, Jimmy Turner says 104-degree heat all summer, and this still looks like this. So it's a great, great plant for heat. Now, the downside sometimes when we do this breeding is we breed out some genes that are good, and in this case, they don't have the fragrance that our old sweet alyssum species have, and that, that's kind of disappointing. But on the other hand, they don't die out in the heat of summer, so they go all summer long. It's about 2 foot wide. It's excellent for a container. They brought out Blushing Princess, Frosty Night. Now, Frosty Night looks like Snow Princess, but if you look close to Frosty Night, it's variegated. Now, you really don't see this unless you have it up close to the house, somewhere in a container, or somewhere where people are actually going to walk by and see that variegated foliage. And then this last year, they came out with White Night that was a little bit smaller than Snow Princess. So there's our 4 last year: Snow Princess, Frosty Night, Blushing Princess, and White Night. And look at this in the shade. Look at that, not a bad thing in the shade. So I was a little excited about that. And again, this is full shade. This is White Night, and this is Snow Princess. So some potential there. Not as heavy. You can see it's not quite as heavy in flower. But boy, in the shade, when you have a white plant that shows this much color, that makes things pop in the shade. Now, Nirenbergia is a very old plant, and that's the nice thing about some of the breeding today. I started my career back in the early 80s in a garden center, and we sold annuals, and our annuals back then did not look like anything like they do today. The characteristics, the compactness, the flowering, the amount of flowers, just much, much greater than it used to be. It's also called the cup plant. These little cup flowers are very delicate foliage. It is a shade plant, doesn't do very well in the sun, so it's another good replacement for impatiens. Excellent for containers or hanging baskets. Summer Splash Light Blue, Summer Splash White. Look at the color. I mean, that's just a great plant for a shady area. Now, Augusta Blue Skies goes in the sun, but you can also see you don't get as much flowering as you would in the shade. So this is another one that can be used in the sun. And again, about a foot, 1.5 feet wide by about 6 inches. So I would definitely use this in a container or hanging basket. I love ornamental peppers. People like ornamental peppers because they're great for the fall. Garden centers really struggle selling ornamental peppers in the spring because when you go to the garden center in the spring, you want color. You're looking for color. These don't give you that much color in the spring. But as they go through the season, they will become spectacular in July, August, September, and they will last clear up until a hard freeze. And that's what I'm looking for my fall garden. So I tolerate a little bit of less color in the early season, knowing that this is what I'm going to get late in the season. And there is Black Pearl, and Black Pearl is one of those that's nice because it does have that dark foliage, so it gives you a little additional color against a pink salvia. And we've tried several different varieties. We are also an All-American display site, so you'll see the different varieties of peppers, different sizes, different shapes. The key to ornamental peppers is that they have color that's up above the foliage. We had one a couple years ago called Sweet Pickle. It's an orange, and it's so cool. And the orange pepper is really, really big and very, very attractive, but it hangs down below the foliage, so you really don't see it unless you're on your hands and knees crawling around. Black Olive, Black Pearl, again, nice foliage variety for full sun, gives you a darker color, but it has to have something to go with it until they start to show their fall color. This came out last year. This is a very interesting plant. It's an oxalis. You can see it looks like a little clover, called Molten Lava. Not really known for its flowering, rather. You can see just little tiny flowering late in the season. But it's known for its foliage. This is the fall coloration. It gets this little orange color. I'm not really quite sure how to take this plant, though, because, I put this in my garden. This is in one of my flower beds, and obviously they didn't grow in and form this big mass that I was hoping. And this kind of reminds me of dog vomit fungus for some reason. I mean, look at that. That's a patch of dog vomit fungus. It just didn't excite me. So the point I'm making is that we try these plants more than 1 year. I mean, seriously, look at that. Doesn't it look the same? And this is a serious problem, not a serious problem, it's really a minor problem in the landscape, but it's mulches that haven't broken down. How many of you have seen this in your landscape? Yeah, so what do? You just kind of rake it up, and once the conditions change, it goes away. So it's not a huge problem, but it's not exactly attractive. Oops, I have a backwards in here. Ornamental pepper New Mex Twilight is my favorite ornamental pepper. This is about 2 foot wide by about 1.5 foot tall. These little peppers are about the size of your thumb and just look like little Christmas lights all over the plant. And they start in July and they start to turn their colors and they're just really great. Okay, geraniums. Pelargonium are geraniums. These are seed geraniums. They're really making great strides with these. Now, we still have to deadhead them. These have to be deadheaded. They are called self-shattering, which means they drop their petals and they send up new flowers. But they still did better when we deadheaded them. So these are timeless in the front here and boldy in the back, good colors. But the thing I want to point out is, look at this, a geranium for the shade. You know, not bad, not bad. I was kind of impressed with this because, you know, the key with sun plants in the shade is they don't put out as much flower, as much color. So this was kind of encouraging to see these plants in the shade. And this is timeless. Both of these are timeless. Okay, grasses. These are ornamental, they are annual. They will not come back again. This is one of those plants I tried to see what it looked like and get it to come back, but they don't. This is fireworks. Early in the season, it has this scarlet color. Later in the season, as it starts to really change, it gets to be about 4 feet tall and a really nice burgundy color with good flowers. And there's a close-up of the stems, but it gets, like I said, it gets kind of darker in the summer. This is vertigo. Vertigo was an interesting plant in our trials. It started out growing like this, and in July, it was just sitting there, and the fact sheet said it gets 4 feet tall. And we're like, wow, this thing gets 4 feet tall. I'm not sure how that works. And it kept growing vertical, horizontal to the ground, rather. And we're thinking, why is it called vertigo? Well, all of a sudden, we went back outside and looked at it, and it was 4 feet tall. And this just happened, literally, it seemed like overnight, but of course it wasn't. But it really will take off then in the heat of the summer. When you hit peak times in July, it gets heat, it will take off. It's 4 feet tall by about 4 feet wide. Again, you're going to pay more for it, but you only need 1 or 2 plants. You don't need a lot. Very tall, no flowers, so it is more of a foliage plant to put. And look at it next to Baby Tut, just nice coloration. Downside on grasses, same with any of your monocots, lilies, things like that, grasshoppers. We have not had tremendous problems with grasshoppers the past couple years. A little bit more of a population last year, but about 4 or 5 years ago we had a tremendous population. Key is just watch for them early when they're tiny. You can spray when they're small and knock them down and not have them get to the point where they cause trouble. And they just make a plant look ragged. Okay, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're in good shape. We're only on P's, PQRS, we're good. Yeah, we're good. All right, petunias. These are what I call the 55-mile-an-hour plants. These are the ones you can put out on the highway and the interchange and people will see them and say, ooh, because they give you color. These are the ones that are super, super easy to take care of. These are the ones you don't have to go to grandma's house and help her deadhead, because I used to hate petunias when I was growing up because we'd have to go out and deadhead. Those varieties, very, very, very few of them are still on the market today. These are vegetative cutting petunias. Like I said, you're going to pay a little bit more for them, but wow, you will get a lot out of them. Now the downside is, this is just part of the list. There are so many varieties out there. And again, one of the reasons I urge you to look at trials is to see what you want to use them for. Are you going to use them for a container? Do you want them to fill in? Do you want them to be nice and tight and very maintained? Look at how they grow and their habits. Many of these, like the Cascadia, Little Tunia Mambo, they're small, multi-flora, and are only going to get about 8 inches to 12 inches wide. Whereas the waves, the Strophinias, the Supertunias, they're going to get 4 feet wide. So know how the plants are going to grow, and again, you can see these in trials and see how they actually perform in the summer. So, Strophinias and Supertunias and some of the waves are very similar. They're larger petunias. They're all vegetative cuttings. Strophinias get about 2 to 3 feet wide and are about an even ground cover, maybe 8 to 10 inches in height. So they're very even in their growth. This is purple veined. The Supertunias are very similar to the Strophinias. Same habit, 2 feet. This is one plant, 2 to 3 feet actually. This is one plant right here. And again, you'll pay about $4.99 for a 4-inch cutting or a 4-inch pot, but this will be in one season, and this is a late September picture. And there's a close-up of Supertunia. Now, look at this. This is in the shade, you guys. You guys aren't as excited as I am. I'm excited about this because this is something that's going to help the industry. If we can find these plants that are grown in the sun and can be grown in the shade, I'll tell you, this impatient thing is a big deal for growers. So if we can find these replacements, this is great. But look at that. That's full shade. And that's in September. Look how nice that is for color. So take 1 or 2, put them in the shade, see what happens. This is Vista Silverberry. Now everybody loves Vista Silverberry. Yeah, look at that. See, I got an ooh and an ah there. Look at that, the dark purple-pink vein. But there is a downside to Vista Silverberry. So when we do some cuttings and we do some breeding and propagation, we use what we take sports. If you see a plant and has a really weird growth or a variegation, all of a sudden it's a green plant and you get a variegated stem, we'll take cuttings from that and we'll start to propagate that and grow it. Well, many of you have probably experienced this. You have a variegated plant like Frosty Morn sedum, for instance, was a beautiful variegated sedum. After about 3 or 4 years, what happens? It reverts back. That man should get a door prize or something for saying that. It reverts back, which means it goes back to the parent plant that it came from. So as you get down the road, multiple generations of cuttings, you lose that variegation sometime. And unfortunately, with Vista Silverberry, the last couple years, we've seen it go back to some of its parent pink. So last year, we had Vista Silverberry solid, and then every once in a while a pink, and we kept thinking, okay, now, is that coming because Vista bubblegum is creeping over and slipping up? No, it was coming from the Silverberry. So we'll see what they do with it, and that's why they do these trials. They like to see what happens in the ground. They like to see what happens in homeowners' yards. And, you know, it may look pretty good for a few years, kind of a variegated effect, but after a while it will probably be taken off the market. Great for a hanging basket, Supertunias as well as the Surfenias. They don't get too big, but they get just the right size. That's a large 24-inch hanging basket that we planted for downtown Springfield several years ago, and just extremely easy to grow, no deadheading whatsoever. These are the charms, Supertunia charms, a little bit smaller, not quite as bold and vigorous. Watermelon, sangria, indigo, pink. Nice smaller petunias. Again, know where you're going to put these plants and decide what's going to fit in there and make that spot look the best. Easy waves. So you've got the wave petunia, and they've got a new purple wave improved that is a little more maintained. It's not quite 12 feet like the first one that came out. That was really vigorous. Purple wave improved is about 4 or 5 feet in width. Easy wave is very much like the Supertunias and the Surfenias. Couple feet, 3 feet wide, and about 8 to 10 inches in height. Tidal wave is on your list. Tidal wave gets a little higher in the middle and a little lower on the end. So if you had a large bed, that's going to give you kind of that undulating tidal wave effect. And shock wave, I'm not really sure where that fits. Sometimes they keep coming out with these things, and I have no idea how they are different because they almost look all the same. Easy wave, pink dawn. Now, the next group of petunias are the ones I call the boutique petunias. These are great plants. They're very pretty. People love the foliage, but they aren't as vigorous as the first few that I shared with you. This is Raspberry Blast, and everybody likes this one. See the variegation, the stripe, they love that. Pretty Much Picasso came out, and I love this one. I mean, my two favorite colors together, purple and green. But notice the vigor of those plants compared to the ones I showed you before. They're just not as vigorous. This is Picasso in pink. I'm not real crazy about that. You can see purple and pink. Not a whole lot, not a great big impact, but they're wonderful for patios, containers, places where people are going to be close by and really be able to appreciate that variegation. And then we have the Simply Beautiful series by Ball. These are, again, notice the vigor. When I say vigor, they're just not as big as the others, but let me tell you, look at that. Black velvet, phantom. You just want to touch those because they just look like velvet. They're really soft. So they're good plants to grow, but they're more for a container up close to the house where people can see them. This came out last year, Cha-Ching Cherry, and the other one was Vintage Rose. So again, they're nice, and I think we had, Rose and Shine. But you just don't see, so don't expect to put these in and see the massive color that you get from the other ones, but enjoy them just the same because they're beautiful plants. Okay, salvia. Oh, we're only on S's. I better pick it up here. Salvia, Golden Delicious. A few years ago it came out. It is not known for its flowers, but look at that chartreuse foliage. Look at it back against the dark purple Ipomoea sweet potato, the red salvia, the blue phlox, red, purple. Great color for foliage, great plant, very sturdy, and it's in full sun, and it did not fade that color during the summer. And it's about 2.5 feet tall. Scaviola. Everybody likes scaviola, including the rabbits. They will bypass petunias to get to the scaviola, and I am not kidding. In our gardens, if we don't put chicken wire around these plants when we put them in the beds, we won't have anything to trial during the summer. The petunias can sit there without anybody bothering them, but they'll go directly for scaviola. So keep that in mind. This is definitely an attractive plant. It's a great ground cover, and it's called the fan flower. Look at the flowers. Very, very artistic in nature. Put these up in a container. Good for sun. They will do well in shade. Excellent to hang down over the side, so they'll grow about a foot and just kind of hang. But those flowers are really nice for containers and hanging baskets. Thunbergia. Every so many years we'll get a new Thunbergia. This was called Lemon Appeal, and this is Vertigo in the back. This is a 4-foot fence, so you can see how big and bold Vertigo is. Nice color, really nice color. It needs something to grow on, and you need to kind of get it started, and once it starts, that thing will spread and take over like crazy. I mean, it'll keep growing to the moon if you had a stake that went to the moon, because it is very, very vigorous. And there's a close-up of the flower, and I had a little wire thing that I got, and I had to stake the wire thing because it got really heavy, but just a really nice, colorful plant for the whole summer long. Shade, Terenia. How many of you remember this from like the 80s, early 80s, years ago? It's been around for a long time, and I guess that means I'm old, right? Terenia Catalina Gilded Grape, excellent shade plant, but look at the throat, the dark burgundy purple throat on that, the yellow flower. Excellent for shade. It is about a 1-foot plant, 1 foot wide by maybe 6-8 inches tall in a mound. And I would put it in a container, but again, up near the house where people can see that and appreciate those flowers. Damaris, these are verbenas, and we change the names because of trademarking and patenting, but these are verbenas. Your sakuras and any of your tamaris grow up, so they're going to get taller. Tapions grow out, so they're going to be flat to the ground. And sometimes tapions in a container have a tendency, as they grow out and down, they won't flower up here, so you have green foliage and you'll have flowers down here. So cutting them back periodically as they grow will encourage them to branch out and have flowers towards the top. So these are tamaris. Superbena is a tamari variety. You can see as it grows up the stem, and there's a close-up shot, and they just keep flowering all summer. Butterflies really liked them. And then your tapions, you can see they spread out. So in a ground cover situation, they'll kind of fill in among each other and fill in that center part of the plant. This is another Superbena, Royal Peachy Keen. You know, sometimes the reds and the odd colors aren't as vigorous. So sometimes we see the red verbenas and even red petunias. They don't tend to be as vigorous as the purples and pinks and the original varieties. Vinca. The secret to Vinca is planting them when the soil is warm. If you plant Vinca when it's too cold and when the soil's too cold, and I mean early May, you know, back when I started in I started at the Garden Center in the late 70s, early 80s, Memorial Day was just kind of passing the day we planted flowers. We were getting into now where Mother's Day was the day we plant annuals, and garden centers were busiest on Mother's Day. Now we really push the limit because we start seeing flowers in April. Folks, if you buy them in April, I know people are wanting them. Good garden centers, quality garden centers are selling them because they're being demanded. I must have these plants, but they will also tell you if you put them in, they may not be surviving. So if you put Vinca in early May and we have a wet, cold spring, they're going to sit there, and then they're going to turn yellow. And what's the first thing you guys do when it turns yellow? Fertilize and water, because oh, that plant needs something. And then it sits there longer, and you think, okay, what's going on? You're going to try to wait it out. Well, actually what's going on, it gets phytophthora root rot in cold soils, cold, wet soils. So if you plant it early and it sits there and turns yellow, no amount of fertilizer is going to turn it green because it doesn't have a root system to take in that fertilizer. So key message, Don't fertilize stressed plants. If they have a problem with their root system, fertilizer is not going to help because they're not going to take that fertilizer in. So we plant ours, remember I said May 28th? Late May. And we have never, knock on wood, we have never had any trouble with our vincas having problems with Phytophthora root rot. These are an excellent plant for full sun. Almost all your varieties of vincas are about 1 foot tall by 1 foot wide, don't need deadheading. At this point in time, no major pest problems that we see, and are a very good sun plant if you get them in the right conditions. Titan Burgundy, this is the Titan series. And again, there's several different series on the market. Titan, Pacifica, they're all really good. We have not seen a poor vinca at this point. Then you also have the spreading varieties. The other thing I wanted to show, vinca in the shade. Not quite as colorful, so these are the same varieties. There's the sun, there's the shade. Not quite as colorful, but you know what? Not bad. Not bad. I think they're acceptable. And I also want to show you, I don't think I have this picture later, look at the zinnias. 2 zinnias I have on this list, 2 Zahara zinnias. Look at those in the shade. Not bad. So what I'm telling you is take a little chance on some of these. Plant 1 or 2. Don't go whole hog and plant a whole big bed. Just plant a couple and see what happens in your shady area. This is Cora Cascade Lilac. So Cora Cascade and Mediterranean are hanging types of vinca. They're going to be more of a ground cover, but more suited for a container or a hanging basket. Now you can get by with planting them a little earlier because you're putting them in a container. A soilless mix is usually a little warmer than the ground, and we don't have that issue with pH in our containers like we do with our soil. So you can put these in a little bit earlier. Okay, so zinnias, you have the Profusion and the Zaharas. They are the ones right now that are really showing up and really showing off in the landscape. There are several different types of Profusions, double fire, knee-high red. Almost all of these, except for knee-high red, are about 1 foot tall by about 1.5 foot rounded mound. Now, when I say 1.5 foot rounded mound, that gives you an example or an idea on how close together. If you want a mass, you need to plant them on 1.5 foot centers, which means from this plant to this plant, it should be 1.5 foot, and they will fill in and give you a nice display like this. So this is double fire. This was cherry and starburst. And both of these were, this is full sun, and I took these pictures in mid-September. You can see the evolvulus is kind of starting to shut down. It was still very dry, no deadheading, and we did not see any powdery mildew or Japanese beetle problems with these particular plants. Another one, this is close-up of sunburst. Another one that we really liked was the Uptown Grape, a little bit taller. This was a ball seed introduction, and it was about 1.5 foot. Almost 2 foot, a little bit more open inside as far as growth habit, but you can see later in the season, and then there's your starburst. Okay, gosh, I did that in pretty good time here. A couple things to finish up. Go.osu.edu/field trials. That is where you can go back and find all of our results, field trial results for all the past years. If you scroll down here, you will see last year's results and all the way back. I don't know how many years we go back, we have the evaluations. The key, you know, some of these plants might end up with a 4 or a 5 at the end of the season. 5 is great. Some of them may start out slow. As you know, in your garden, some plants really start out slow and then they take off, and then vice versa. So if you really want to get into the numbers, you can go to the site and you can actually see how they did during the June evaluation, July, August, and September, and then the composite ranking that we give them, and we have pictures as well. So you can go back and see pictures if you'd like to see it again. As I said, we're an All-American Selection site. All-American Selection is a little bit different than our trials. We still evaluate them the same way, but with All-American Selections, and we are the only site for field trials, bedding plants, and flowers in Ohio, we compare the entry to those that have already won or are standard good proven varieties. So we might have 5 varieties of petunia or 5 petunias, and the entry is compared to like varieties. And if it does as well as these, then it might be considered for an All-American Selection Award. If it does way better than these varieties that are already tried and true, it will definitely get an award. So come see our sites, because we do have some great varieties we're trialing. We are not a vegetable site. We just do flowers, bedding plants, and winter plants. We are also participating in a National Plant Trials database, and I'm excited about this because this is new. When I first started trialing back in the 80s, Everybody across the country had different criteria. We all did it differently. So if somebody would go to a university site and see the plants and they say, oh, well, this gets a 5, why does it get a 10 over here? Well, none of us had standard criteria. We are now pushing and working together with all universities across the country and all trialing sites to come up and get a little more standardized in our criteria. In addition, if you go to this site, you can see how these plants did in other areas, and you can find pictures of other plants in other areas if you want to know more about these particular plants. So I'm really excited that we're starting to move towards this consistency in our trialing across the country. And with that, I have a few minutes if we want to hit the lights again. 11:09, that is like almost 60 minutes on the dot. And I typically don't do that. Okay, so I'll open the floor if there's a couple questions, a few questions. Yes, ma'am.
You said you just fertilized once. When was that once?
Question was, we just fertilized once. When was that? We fertilized at the time of planting. We follow label directions. Very, very important. So with we're using a triple 14 product called Osmocote. Many of you are familiar with it. Doesn't matter what you use. If it says a teaspoon, a tablespoon per 4-inch pot, we are using a tablespoon per 4-inch pot. And that tube that you saw that she was using, that's our high-tech way of dropping that down to the ground so we don't have to get down on the ground on our hands and knees. Question up there I saw. Yes, ma'am.
You gave an email address that was .edu, and I couldn't catch what it was.
For the field trials, go.osu.edu/field trials. And that's our site where you can go right to that field trials instead of digging down deep in our county website. Question up there.
When you talk about rotating, like impatience,
Huh?
like how long are you talking?
Oh, good question. Really good question. Door prize for her too if we have extras. How long when you talk about rotating, how often or how long should you go before you plant back in there? For downy mildew on impatiens, we are recommending 3 to 5 years. I know, it hurts, doesn't it? It hurts. It's not put it in, and it's the same thing in your vegetable garden. Same thing with tomatoes. You know, you shouldn't plant tomatoes in the same spot every year, so you should rotate. Now, I know that gets to be a real challenge if you've got an 8 by 24 foot garden, you know, you're here, here, here. It's hard to do. But again, the longer you put that plant in there, the more the organisms can build up and stay around and stick around, and eventually they're going to be causing problems for your plants. So 3 to 5 years to starve that organism before you go back in there. Yes, right there. Nice and loud.
Do you till the trial beds every year, and what do you think about the no-till?
Good question. Another really great question. Okay, no-till. I always get on my high horse because some of my colleagues say, oh, no-till with flower beds and vegetables. And I agree, no-till is a fantastic method. But if you're going to go no-till, there's some things you have to do. So her question was, do I till every year? We till once a year in the spring prior to planting, 1 time a year. The key is, and the problem is, over-tilling. And those of you who have mantis tillers, mantis are good tillers, there's nothing wrong with them, but people like to use them and they're in there all the time. You are breaking down the soil structure, and that's the problem. So it's sometimes challenging not to till the garden. So I till my garden twice a year, spring and fall, and I've been doing this since the early 80s. I can't even figure out how long that's been, many years. Long enough that I still have success in my soils, but I'm not over-tilling and I'm adding organic matter to increase that. If you go no-till, let's say a vegetable garden, you keep adding compost and you're not going to till this area. The key is you also can't walk in that area. That area becomes your permanent garden site. So you have to kind of create bed space that you can no-till functionally, if that makes sense. So that bed can't be wider than your reach, because the key to no-till is that you don't go back in and walk on it, which means you compact it, which means you defeat the purpose of no-till. Does that make sense? So yeah, we till once, and I can get into a whole lecture on tilling and soils and all that stuff, and people will argue you should not till at all, and I agree. No-till is a good practice, but you've got to alter the way you do your gardening if you're going to go no-till. Very good question. Yes, ma'am.
Could you make some suggestions about combining perennials with annuals?
Okay, some suggestions about combining perennials with annuals as far as specific plants Or in terms of what?
Just generally, do you have some suggestions for using annuals
Okay.
in a primarily perennial
Okay,
garden?
absolutely. The question is suggestions on using annuals in a perennial garden. Now, the first year you plant a perennial garden, second year until about that third year, you've got bare spots. So the more bare spots you have, you can fill in with more annuals until those perennials go. The other option is, as they start to grow, if you have gaps in color. So let's say you didn't do a really good job of planting seasonal color, so you have early spring, but then you get a gap. You can start putting in those annuals in certain spots to fill in and give you that additional color that you might need during the summer. The other option, which gets a little challenging, but some people have done this, is to plant a container of annuals and pop it in that garden spot and move it periodically if you don't have color. Now that, to me, that's way too much work, so I wouldn't be doing that. But that is a possibility as well. Does that help you with what you're thinking? Okay, all right, good. Any more questions? A couple more.
What are your feelings on Osmocote?
What are my feelings? As far as what?
Using it, so many people put it in the plants at the beginning.
Right. Well, and that's what we use, triple 14 Osmocote. It doesn't have to be Osmocote, and of course I work for the university, so I'm not going to say one's better than the other. My key is read the label. Osmocote does a terrific job if you follow the label, do the right amount. Now, you get 90 days, you get 120 days. Sometimes that depends on the weather. Sometimes that depends on the heat, the water. It'll break down faster. In our containers, we have quite a few container displays. We will use Osmocote in the beginning of the season as a regular, just to kind of, give them additional fertilizer during the summer. But we also fertilize with a liquid fertilizer on a regular basis until mid-July. And the reason is we are pushing growth early to get them to look good for display, but we back off to once a week the rest of the summer. Now again, container fertilization is different than ground. Your soil has nutrients in it. Remember I said go back and do a soil test. You'll see your soil has nutrients in it except for nitrogen, because nitrogen leaches through the soil. Soilless mixes that are lightweight, well-drained, great for growing containers don't have nutrients. So you have to fertilize on a regular basis. You know how you go to the garden center and your family gets you a really beautiful container for Mother's Day, a hanging basket. I mean, we used to sell tons of hanging baskets. And it's beautiful when you get it home and you hang it up and you water it and you take care of it, and by July, what's it look like? Not quite as beautiful, because they're fertilizing on a regular basis to keep that plant at its peak. In the summertime, we don't tend to stick with that. So as far as Osmocote or any product, if you follow label directions, you're going to give them the amount of nutrition that they need for the season. Okay? Question, how much more time do we have for questions? 2 more, 3 more? Okay.
What are the best growing conditions for New Guinea patients?
Best growing conditions for New Guinean patients are semi-shade. Is semi-shade. Is semi-shade, because that heat of the afternoon is what really does them in. Yep. Question.
What about lobelia? It seems to always, at least for me, peter out when it gets hot.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a plant that likes cool early season and cool fall, but in the summertime it just kind of sits there, and we haven't seen a really good lobelia. My guess is that sooner or later we're going to have a heat-tolerant lobelia, just like we do the heat-tolerant alyssa, but that's exactly what happens. And another one you may have on your list that I didn't put up here, ageranthemum. Beautiful plant. We buy them like crazy in the spring because they're like a daisy. They're full, they're beautiful, but what happens in the summer? They do the same as lobelia. They just kind of fade away, but they have really pretty foliage. And when it happens, when they start to fade away, the best thing to do is pick them up, cut them back in half, and encourage new growth, because they just kind of get straggly then if you don't. So all of those plants that fade out in the heat of the summer, shear them a little bit, and they'll come back and they'll give you that fall color, and you don't have to put as many mums in because things look bad. 2 more questions. Lady in the green.
Yes, my favorite summer annual, year after year, is the annual blue salvia.
Okay.
That thing, you plant one plant and it becomes a nice bush.
Yep.
It's sturdy.
Yep.
Bumblebees love it.
Yes.
But it's a great pot plant
Yes.
in the yard.
Yes.
And
Blue salvia, Victoria blue, and some of the others. And they are wonderful, except I think I heard or saw something about a seed shortage because of a virus or something that happened. So you're probably going to see diminishing numbers of those for a while until we get that taken care of. One more question right here in the front.
I have rabbits, but I have no deer.
I have rabbits, but I have more deer. Any suggestions? Well, a dog, a shotgun. The dog can't be left out at night. Yeah, deer are problems, and the greatest story I think I've ever heard was at Longwood Gardens, Philadelphia. Longwood, yeah, Longwood. They had deer inside. They have this big fenced-in area, 10 foot. 10 foot high is what you need to keep the deer out. Where the deer had gotten in, started populating the gardens. So they got a dog, and the dog did a phenomenal job keeping the deer in the wooded area and out away from the plants, until the dog got allergies and had to take antihistamines. And then that dumb dog slept all the time, and so they had to get rid of the dog. So I love that story. So deer. When it comes to deer, and we have seen footprints in our trial gardens. So when somebody says, well, what plants do the deer not eat? I don't know in our trials, because they haven't yet, knock on wood, gotten into eating the plants. They're going after other things that are there. They're right now using it to kind of walk through. They haven't damaged any of our annuals. So does anybody have a suggestion on annuals that the deer don't like? A dead silence is not a good sign. And the problem is, there's lists of plants that deer won't eat, and you can go to the internet and find all kinds of lists. But when deer are hungry, they will still eat on those when it gets to the point where they need it. The challenge with deer, of course, is the fencing. If you go to West Virginia, down in that area, and you want a vegetable garden, you got to have a 10-foot fence or you won't have a garden. I mean, you exclude them. And same thing with rabbits, the fencing to exclude them. Once the plants get a little bit taller and, harder, tougher, they don't taste as good, the rabbits don't bother them. But the deer, it's just going to be preventing their habitat from coming into your area. And it's a tough thing. It really is. And we have some deer. We don't have them bad, but we also have a dog around that kind of keeps, during the day, he marks his spot. And I notice he's kind of kept him out, of the area. And I could stay here and answer questions all day because you guys are great. But I thank you very much for coming today, and enjoy the spring.
Okay, before we get to the other highlight of the morning, I would like for you to join me in thanking our businesses that donated these beautiful door prizes. Grandma's Garden, Far Hills Florist, The Flower Man, and Ober's Centerville for their gift cards and their arrangements. And also I needed to let all the Master Gardener volunteers in the audience know that this session was good for a 1 hour of continuing ed. Continuing ed is necessary with us Master Gardeners to get recertified every year and to keep up with what's going on.